Hello and welcome back to another episode of Notion Bonsai. In this video, I'm going to be talking all about bonsai soil, each component, what they do, as well as how you can make your very own bonsai soil mix at home. Alright, so welcome to the soil video. Now, if you are a complete beginner to bonsai, you may first be thinking, what is bonsai soil? And how does it differ to, say, the dirt that's in my garden, or even a bag of compost that I would get from a garden centre? Put simply, bonsai soil is just a mix of different components, all blended together, that is specifically designed to help a tree grow and thrive in a small pot. Now, depending on who you speak to in bonsai, you could ask 100 different people what soil mix that they use, and you would probably get 100 different answers. And for me to tell you in this video that here's sort of a one mix that fits everyone would be really inaccurate. There isn't really sort of a one size fits all mix to do everything, because everyone has different growing conditions, depending on firstly the species of tree that you're using the soil mix for, and then the local climate that the tree is in, depending on where you live or what country you're from. For example, I use a very free draining soil mix, as you can see here, as it rains a lot here in Northern Ireland and I don't want my soil to become too wet. So this free draining mix allows the water to just flow through without holding on to too much moisture. But if you were to use my exact soil mix in a warmer country like Australia, for example, the trees would live, yes, no problem. However, in order to keep the tree alive, you would probably be watering the trees maybe 3 to 5 times a day, because the water would simply be evaporating off this too quickly. This is compost. Now, one of the biggest beginner mistakes that I personally see when it comes to trees and soil is, even with trees that comes from big box stores where they're sold as a starter bonsai, it's trees planted in pure compost. If you get a tree for the first time and it's planted in pure compost and you live in a climate like I do where it rains a lot, I would just personally recommend getting the tree out of that into a more free draining soil, if the tree is healthy enough to do so. You see, the problem I have with compost and pure compost with trees is the soil can quite quickly become compacted, and that is when the tree's watered and it pulls all the soil down with that watering. You know, imagine this like 10 waterings later, the soil gets more and more and more compact, and before you know it, there's not enough oxygen and aeration in the soil. And the second problem I have with pure compost is it can stay really wet for a really long time, especially if you're in a rainy climate. And for me, if I have trees in pure compost, compaction aside, the roots just stay wet for too long, and this then leads to root rot, and then as a result, the health of the tree suffer. I'm not saying compost is bad. If you live in a warmer climate, by all means, add a little bit of compost or pine bark into your mix, and that can just help it retain a little bit more water for longer. Particle size is one of the most important but often overlooked aspects of bonsai soil. Each size and particle in the soil will determine how water flows through the pot and how much oxygen stays in the soil. For bonsai, we usually use a particle size anywhere between 2 and 6 millimeters, depending on the size of the tree and pot. Larger particles in the soil means there's more air gaps in the soil, and this will also help the soil from being compacted or waterlogged. It is also important that the particle size are roughly the same size, because if you've got a mix of big particles and small particles, what tends to happen is the small particles tend to settle between the gaps of the bigger particles, and this will just reduce the overall porosity of the mix. So just by having an even particle size will give you the correct drainage, and you'll have a really good balance of water and oxygen. Beyond structure, there's also a chemical aspect to soil. This is known as the cation exchange capacity, also referred to as the CEC. And this is just a big fancy term that we give for the soil's ability to hold on to essential nutrients and then release them slowly to a tree. So if I take this tree, for example, this is a little Japanese larch. If this was in a soil that had no cation exchange capacity, it was just completely like a bowl of marbles, as long as the roots remained hydrated and got the nutrients they need, the tree would probably survive. But if I give this fertilizer and there's no cation exchange capacity in the soil, with the very next watering, all the nutrients that we just sort of poured in will be flushed away, and you'll have to fertilize every watering. One of the most popular components of bonsai soil throughout the world, especially in Japan, is Akadama. This has quite a high CEC, meaning this can hold on to nutrients for quite a while and slowly release them to your bonsai. Other soil components like lava rock and pumice, while they're not as high in CEC, they do contribute to overall drainage and aeration, as well as having some slight mineral benefits. So by mixing all of these components together, it will give you a soil mix that contributes to both the physical structure to maintain and support healthy roots, as well as the soil's chemical ability to feed your tree. This big sack that I just brought in is full of what is known as biochar. And in terms of the timeline of bonsai soil, it is a relatively new ingredient that people have started mixing in, and it has so many benefits. So this is what the biochar looks like. As you can see, I've got it in this little bowl here, and it's a very porous, carbon-rich material, and it's made by burning organic matter, more likely wood chips, in an oxygen-low environment, and that gives you this biochar. And I found it's an excellent additive in bonsai soil. If I don't want to add compost or pine bark to hold a little bit more moisture, I find a little bit of biochar does a great job, and it has a really stable structure that doesn't break down over time. Its microscopic structure inside the biochar makes it really good at holding on to water and nutrients. So in a way, biochar also has quite a high CEC. And not only that, it's really beneficial for the microbes in the soil, especially if you've soaked the biochar in something like a compost tea or fertilizer before use. Pines in particular, like this little Japanese black pine that I'm developing as a bonsai, benefit a lot from biochar in the soil mix, because biochar provides the ideal environment for the mycorrhizal fungi to form. And this symbiotic mycelium that's in the soil will help pines absorb water and nutrients more effectively, especially phosphorus. And the little sort of fine structure of the mycelium thrives in biochar. It finds its way through all the little nooks and crannies, that microscopic structure, and it can really spread out in the pot with all of that surface area. When it comes to the species of tree, only generally speaking, I'm not saying for every species this is true, junipers and pines, they transport water a little bit slower than broadleaf trees, for example, like a Japanese maple, which takes water up pretty quickly. And this is known as the water mobility of the trees. So these species would be classed as low water mobility, whereas maples and a lot of other deciduous species are high water mobility. It doesn't hurt to add a little bit of organic matter into species that have high water mobility, whereas the pines and junipers, I've just got these in a very free draining mix that the water drains through pretty fast. This Japanese larch bonsai forest that I have here, Japanese larches just absolutely love water. As you can see, I have this planted in almost 100% compost, and this is why it's extremely important, depending on the tree you're working with, do some research and see how much water they like. And I think this is a really good example of it depends on how much time you got. For example, this is another Japanese larch, exact same species as the forest, but this little tree is in a free draining mix, and now that it's summer, I have to water this like 2 to 3 times a day just to keep it alive, whereas in the forest that's in the organic soil, I only have to water this once a day. If you've got lots of time in the day, by all means put it into a free draining mix. The roots will grow faster because there's more spaces between the soil and you can develop a tree a little bit quicker. But if you work and you don't have time every day to come out water like 2-3 times a day, consider adding a more organic component so the trees will stay alive when you're not there. Now, my personal bonsai soil mix is usually a mix of one of these 3 ingredients with maybe some other additives. Here I have pumice, semi-fired Akadama, and lava rock, and each of these 3 ingredients play a specific role to support firstly the needs of my trees and also the wet Irish climate that I live in. Pumice is really lightweight and porous, as you can see, which makes it excellent for retaining just the right amount of moisture while also allowing the air to flow freely around the roots. It encourages strong fibrous roots and it helps to prevent compaction over time. Lava rock over here is like the drainage powerhouse of a bonsai soil mix. As you can see, really dense structure. It's got these sort of like micro holes in it for roots to cling onto. It's super hard, it never breaks down, which really helps keep the soil nice and open and gritty. The semi-fired Akadama, this adds some moisture retention just like pumice, thanks to its sort of like clay-like structure. And as we know from before, it has an excellent CEC. I have found that the semi-fired version of Akadama, which is even better for my climate as it rains so much. It's important to keep in mind when you're getting Akadama for your bonsai soil mix that not not all Akadama is created equal, in the sense that depending on the region that the Akadama is mined, or even the depth that it's mined, will determine the quality of the Akadama. So the stuff that's mined at like the surface level, you'll get this stuff which is known as double line Akadama. This is the standard. This is like the most common Akadama that you will find. It's soft, breaks down pretty quickly. I've seen this stuff break down in as little as 1 year. So this is more suited to dry climates or trees that's being repotted pretty often. If you're in a wet climate, this stuff can turn to mush pretty quickly, and it can really compact the root system. Next, there is the stuff that I personally like to use. This is semi-fired Akadama. It's partially baked, sometimes naturally, in volcanic regions. It retains moisture and nutrients just the way that the double line Akadama does, but it holds its shape a lot better, doesn't break down as quickly, so it's more suitable for climates like Ireland. And finally, there is this, known as hard-fired Akadama. This is being completely fired. It's the toughest of all Akadamas. It's almost like a red brick. It's the most durable and breaks down the slowest, even in wet conditions. The only disadvantage to this is it's a little bit more on the pricey side. I would use this a lot more for refined trees that I don't want to repot that often. So for trees that's in development, I'd be using the semi-fired stuff, and then if I've got more refined trees, I'll use something that breaks down a little bit slower. So again, this is another case where it depends not only on the species of tree, but the stage of development that your tree is at. This is what the three types of Akadama look like side by side. It is important to note that the color difference isn't always an indicator of the quality of Akadama. Usually the color is determined by the mineral content, mostly iron. You can always feel with your fingers sort of the quality. You can feel it's softer. This one makes a little bit more of a noise. And then the final stuff is like really solid. Not sure if that's helpful, but I can usually tell just by feeling the Akadama what kind it is. For azaleas, I will use one of two different soil mix options depending on which I have available to me at the time. The first is Kanuma. This is a very lightweight, acidic soil that comes from Japan. It's a little bit more on the pricier side and a little bit harder to get. It can allow lots of oxygen to the roots. It drains exceptionally well, and its lightweight structure and sort of porous structure means the fine fibrous roots of the azalea can cling onto it really well. So you've got good root structure. If you don't want to spend the money on this, I would recommend using some ericaceous compost with perlite. The ericaceous compost on its own can compact pretty quickly, so that's why I recommend mixing in some perlite to give it a little bit more aeration. You could also add in some of your pumice or Akadama lava rock to add a little bit more drainage, but perlite is a cheaper option. And it is crucial that you do get the ericaceous type compost, because azaleas like the acidity in the soil. Ericaceous compost is for acid loving trees like your camellias, azaleas and rhododendrons. Perlite is quite easy to come by in most garden centers or nurseries. And it's this sort of white, very lightweight volcanic glass. And when I say lightweight, I mean, look at this. It is super lightweight. If I'm working with more refined azaleas, I will spend the money on some good Kanuma. But if I want something that's just quick, cheap and easy for trees that's just in development, I would use some ericaceous. But more recently, this year, I have just been experimenting with different soil types. And you'll notice with these azalea here from a previous video of mine, I just put them into some pumice Akadama lava rock mixture to see how they would do. And so far, they're doing pretty well. This one is just about to flower. Now I'm going to show you how you can make your very own bonsai soil mix at home. And it's really straightforward. Whenever I have my mix, it's usually mixed at a ratio of 1 to 1 to 1. So here I'm just taking some pumice, semi-fired Akadama, and lava rock. Then it isn't really anything complicated. We just take these ingredients and simply mix them together. And it really is as easy as that to make your own bonsai soil mix, but we're not done yet. After this, there's a crucial step that I think is worth doing, and that is to sieve out the fines, because any fine particles that's in this mix, especially if it's coming in from transportation, the soil will sort of rub against each other, little tiny pieces will break off, and you'll get a fine dust in your soil mix. Next, I'm going to pour it into the sieve. If you want, you can use a garden sieve, but I just have this kitchen sieve. And as you can see already, there's some fines coming out. So we just give this a little shake. You can see all the fine particles that's in here. This would have come out in our bonsai pots, caused some compaction, or even clogged the drainage holes at the bottom. That's why it's really important to sieve your soil and get all these fines out. Don't worry if some of your substrate flies off, you can just throw it back in. I'm just topping up the surface level of the soil on this Fuji cherry, and as you can see here, I've got this little mesh scoop. So there's a sieve built into the back of the scoop. So even if there is still some fine particles in your soil, as you pour it into a pot like this, you're also sieving out the fines, which I think is pretty handy. Now, depending on where you live, you might not be able to get the exact ingredients that I use in my soil mix. And if this is the case for you, don't panic. My mix is not the absolute perfect mix. I don't think there is such a thing. I just think there's a mix that suits you. A great alternative for Akadama that I've seen a lot of people use is just simple cat litter. The molar clay type, just make sure that whatever cat litter that you do get is labeled as non-clumping, then it won't go sort of mushy. And also really ensure that the cat litter doesn't have any sort of added chemicals or fragrances that's sort of designed to make it not smell bad or disinfect the cat's litter, because these chemicals may harm your trees. A good alternative to pumice is just simple perlite. It's nice and light, it holds some moisture. A good alternative for lava rock is just some ordinary horticultural grit, or you could even use some sharp sand. This can be added to any soil mix to improve drainage. Grit is really nice to use on conifers in wet climates. But if you are using grit in your soil mix, be sure to add something else, because grit does have a really low CEC. It almost holds no nutrients at all, so you do want something else in there so your trees can get a steady supply of feed. I can't possibly cover every single alternative and soil additive in this video, but please share with me down in the comments what soil mix that you use in your mix. I'd really love to hear it. But on that, I'm going to end off this video right here. If you enjoyed and this video helped you, remember to leave a like. It really helps out the channel a lot with the YouTube algorithm. If you think that there's anything that I missed in this video, please share it with me down in the comments. I love learning new things about bonsai. If you'd like to support me and the things that I do on this channel, hit the thanks button down below. Or if you would like to become a channel member, hit the join button. That way you will get early access to new videos before they go out to everyone else, and you will get access to membership posts. But on that, thank you so very much for watching.